right, friends. Well, I think we should probably get started here. It's 4 minutes after 12, and I want to be thoughtful about people's time. Um, Hello, everybody. My name is Ellen Rainey. I work in Hamilton's alumni office, and welcome to today's session about how to stop worrying and start loving phone calls. I am really pleased to be able to introduce our presenter today, Jonathan Rick. So Jonathan graduated from Hamilton in 2005 with a major in government, and he's now based in the Washington, D.C. area in Arlington, my old stomping grounds. And he's built his career on the writing and speaking skills he honed on College Hill. He now runs the Jonathan Rick Group, which is a communications consultancy. His clients have included NASCAR, Booz Allen, Visa, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, as well as federal agencies like the Food and Drug Administration and the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security. In his spare time, I know he's a master's swimmer, and he also teaches business writing at the University of Maryland, College Park. And he's here today to talk with us about what some of us view as a necessary burden, but he sees as an opportunity, our favorite telephone. As we start the presentation, we are going to mute everybody to cut down on background noise. You can feel free to post questions in the chat box. I know, however, that John wants this to be interactive, so he may be calling on us to answer some questions during the presentation. So of course, feel free to unmute yourself to answer, and I hope we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. And now I'm happy to turn it over to Jonathan Rick.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Really appreciate this. Hello from Washington, D.C. Thanks for spending part of your afternoon with me. I'm grateful for the invitation and delighted to chat with you. A quick note before we begin. Back in college, I was your typical liberal arts student. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Well, that's not entirely true. I thought I wanted to be a lexicographer. Then it was a philosophy professor. Finally, I settled on journalist, only to realize I didn't want to report, I wanted to opine. And that's basically what I do today as a ghostwriter. But here's the good news for those who are still in college or who have recently graduated. If you're in a similar situation, not only is such indecision perfectly normal, it's also eminently solvable because you have the benefit of a world-class education. Hamilton taught me how to think, how to write, and how to present, and all three of those skills are foundational to my career. Okay, so our topic today is how I learned to stop worrying and start loving phone calls, conveying confidence and vigor when your audience can't see you. First things first, pat yourself on the back for being here. Phone calls are easy to flub. What's worse, you likely won't know you could have done better or even what you could have done because there's no formal training in this subject. Indeed, almost everyone complains about the scourge of conference calls. About a third of calls is spent planning another call. Another third is spent asking someone to repeat what she just said, and another third could have been emails. But don't blame yourself. Blame your employer, which likely never conducted any workshops on the do's and don'ts of communicating through the phone. That's why we're here today, to equip you with the best practices you need to both participate in and host a terrific telemeeting. The topic of phone calls is a personal one for me. My second job was at Susan Davis International, or SDI, a boutique PR agency here in Washington. I was your typical junior staffer, self-centered and impatient. And because I didn't like talking on the phone, I very deliberately excluded my phone number from my email signature. What's more, my phone mail message said something like, "I rarely check my voicemail. Please email me." In short, as Ellen said, I viewed the phone as a burden. Today, I know better. I view the phone not as a burden, but as an opportunity. I recognize that relationships to thrive can't exist solely in an electronic world. Sometimes you just need to hear the other person's voice. Listen, I swear by email. It's one of humankind's most magnificent inventions. But the truth is, the phone is a better vehicle to forge and nurture a connection than email is. In fact, I now talk on the phone so much that I purchased this expensive pair of Bose wireless headphones. Calls are so critical relative to other forms of communication. I want to read you a quote. It can be tempting to hide behind the safety blanket of Slack or email, but having phone conversations can be especially effective in building stronger relationships. The ability to convey tone often plays a positive and humanizing role in these conversations, and all of that is lost in email, end quote. In other words, phone calls are uniquely powerful. Indeed, the best communicators are often the best listeners. They listen to learn, uncovering what no email can reveal and no reading of a report can reproduce. And so, in hearing someone's intonation and inflection, whether, she pauses and stumbles after you ask about budget or cuts you off when you start talking about the product's latest and greatest feature, you can glean far more info than you ever could hope for via the written word alone. A few more notes before we begin. To master the phone call, the first thing I'd encourage you to do is modify your mindset. Don't just think of our topic today as mere phone calls. Instead, think of phone calls as virtual meetings, which in turn are part of a broader skill set called executive presence. Treat a call the same way you'd treat a meeting or even a presentation. Don't wing it. Prepare. Don't multitask. Focus. And don't do it while wearing pajamas on your couch. If you wouldn't do it in person, then don't do it on the phone. There are two basic categories of calls. First, we have sales calls where you're pitching someone. Then we have the dreaded status call where you meet regularly with your team. Then there are also two basic types of calls. There are group calls, which are otherwise known as conference calls, and then there are one-on-one calls. We're going to cover all four categories and types. One last thing. Anyone know what TV show this is? Anyone?
You can put it in the chat. I know, but I'm not going to cheat.
I think someone said it. Yeah, it's Veep. It's the HBO show Veep. And if you like the show Veep, I hope you'll appreciate the references I've woven in here and there. Pop culture makes everything more fun, right? Okay, so why do calls matter? Well, let me offer you three negative reasons why they matter. First, the person on the other end of the line is judging you a lot on your authority. By the way, Sydney, I love your dog. That is fantastic. Everybody should have a dog in their webcam. Thank you. I'm sorry, I got distracted. So everyone's judging you on your authority, your confidence, your tone, on your diction, your professionalism, your gravitas. Think of your interlocutor as Judge Judy. Everything you say can and will be used to judge you. Specifically, when someone can't see you, she'll use every nonverbal cue to size you up. You could be the smartest person on the line, but if you don't present that way, you won't be judged that way. What's more, once you've dug this hole, good luck climbing out. It's almost impossible to reverse a first impression. The bottom line, your message is only as good as your ability to deliver it. Here's the second reason calls matter. As the host of a call, you assume many responsibilities. Expectations are high. Fall short, and you'll dent your reputation as both a leader and a manager. We've all been on in a call that steamrolled right past the scheduled end time, or which could have been obviated by an email. Sometimes we fault the chatterbox who wouldn't shut up, but almost always the blame ultimately falls on the guy who called the meeting, which is understandable. If you convene a group, it's your duty to ensure that your event is efficient and productive. If the Wi-Fi at a confab goes down, you don't fault the hotel, you fault the organizers, the people you paid. The same is true with a call. The buck stops with the host. Finally, the third reason. From your employer's perspective, an ineffective call means your company is losing time and money. That's how you succeed in business, right? By losing time and money? Of course not. Poorly run calls have a tremendously negative impact. There's even a phrase for them, meeting recovery syndrome. That's where people lose additional time and productivity because afterward, they have to vent or mentally refocus. Here's the way I like to think about teleconferences. Hosting a 1-hour call with 4 people doesn't cost 1 hour. Hosting a 1-hour call with 4 people costs 4 hours. So make every call count. But the news isn't all bad. Calls also have positive benefits. Let me offer, again, 3 of those. First, calls are one of the few opportunities you get in front of a dedicated audience to demonstrate your leadership potential, your soft skills, your ability to think creatively and analytically. That's a lot of opportunity to shine in a single place. Second, have you ever wondered if you're in the office of someone important? Here's a giveaway. Look for one of those conference call phones on her second desk. That means she's a bigwig. That's because interviews, pitches, and all kinds of information exchanges are increasingly conducted by phone. Calls are easier, faster, and cheaper than get-togethers in person. Indeed, teleconferences were a trend even before COVID-19. Now they're a fact of life. So if you're not already presenting regularly over the phone, there's a good chance you'll be expected to as you rise through the ranks. Finally, if you want to get better at public speaking, then phone calls are a peerless way to practice. It's hard to get an audience. It's easy to call someone. So try this. Every time you make a call, treat it as a mini performance. Test your opening line, see which jokes fall flat, play around with pauses and questions and flow. If you want to sharpen your speaking skills, then start thinking of phone calls as performances. So, we've covered a lot of general stuff. Now let's get specific. I've broken our workshop up this afternoon into 3 simple sections. Number 1, what to do before the call. Number 2, what to do during the call. And I'm sure you can guess number 3, very difficult, what to do after the call. Okay, so let's start obviously with what to do before the call. First thing I want to discuss is punctuality. I want to hire employees who arrive late. Said no boss ever. Yeah. We all know someone, maybe a colleague, maybe a friend, maybe even a significant other, who's perpetually late. They never fail to fail. Initially, we may think it's cute, and the person may even apologize with sincerity, just as my old girlfriend does. But here's the thing, and full warning, I'm about to go on a rant. When you're late, when you don't prioritize punctuality, the message you're sending to others is that your time is more important than their time. Morally, this is disrespectful, wasteful, and offensive. Practically, the longer you force someone to wait, the harder it is to make a positive first impression. Take a step back and consider the scenario surrounding a scheduled call. The person you're calling has blocked time out of her day for you. Maybe she's even left her cubicle so she can huddle in a quiet conference room. You've told her you'll be available at 11 a.m. So when you keep her hanging, you're breaking a promise. Let me put the point this way. Punctuality isn't just a professional courtesy. It's also a reflection of your integrity, or lack thereof. There's more. This is clearly one of my pet peeves. Punctual people tend to be responsible and reliable. They're the kind of folks you can count on without having to follow up. They're the kind of folks who make your life easier, who decrease rather than increase the stress in your life. Don't be that guy who invariably arrives 5 minutes late and then interrupts everyone to announce his name. Here's a personal story. Rarely does someone hire me without having spoken to me on the phone. And I'll tell you what, as eager as I am to land business, I embrace this early give and take because it reveals what this person will be like as a client. In fact, one of the most revelatory indicators of a person's disposition is how hard they are to get on the phone. Do they call you 10 minutes late? Do you call them at the appointed time only to get voicemail? These small data points are a pretty good proxy for the subsequent relationship. One final point, almost done, guys. Punctuality doesn't require any special skills or smarts. All it requires is one basic thing: effort. All it requires is that you make a decision to show up on time. Okay, rant over. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. Does anyone know what this is? Hint, it's from Germany. Anyone? It's the Intercity Express, or ICE, the flagship train in Germany. Around the world, when people think of a German train, they think of precise punctuality. That's a reputation you want to cultivate for yourself. Be the ICE train. Here's a trick to perfect your punctuality. Use the tech at your fingertips. Every appointment on your calendar has a field for a notification or alert. Here's what it looks like. See that thing in the circle? Avail yourself of this alarm. It doesn't matter if you set it for 5 minutes before the event or 15. Just don't, ask to be reminded about an 11 a.m. call at 11 a.m. Remember, punctuality reflects your integrity or lack thereof. One final point about our punctuality friend. Look, I get it. Once in a while, being late is unavoidable. Life happens. In fact, running a minute or two behind is perfectly acceptable. What I'm most concerned about is anything more than, say, 5 minutes. If you're going to be more than 5 minutes late, for any reason, you need to send a message with two things: an apology and your estimated time of arrival, or ETA. For example, here's a text I recently received. Sorry for the last minute notice, but my meeting is running long, so I'll likely be 5 to 10 minutes late to our call at 3. There you have it, an apology and an ETA. Actually, if you look at the text message closely, you'll see there's a third thing. There's an explanation. That's more of a nice to have than a must have. Okay, the second thing I'd like to discuss is how to schedule a call. I'd like to emphasize a few points that may seem like minutia. Here's the thing though. If you master this minutia, you'll earn the gratitude of everyone you speak with. Let's start with the best way to make it clear when you're available to chat. When scheduling a call by email, here's what most people do. I'm available at 1:15 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. You can do better than this. Here's what smart people do. I'm available between 1 and 1:30 p.m. and 4:30 and 5:30 p.m. What's the difference? Anyone? What's the difference between these two messages? The key word is between. Anyone? To be flexible, smart people provide a window rather than an exact time. A window rather than an exact time. Here's another related example. What's the difference? Hang on, did I screw that up? To be flexible, I'm sorry. Yet even after you've agreed to a time, there's still work to do. It behooves you to confirm the details. After agreeing to a time, most people say something like this. Great, I look forward to chatting. Again, smart people know better. They say, great, I look forward to chatting on 1 p.m. on Monday, April 2nd. In other words, smart people repeat the time and date. Now, very smart people take it one step further. Great, I look forward to chatting on 1 p.m. on Monday, April 2nd. I'll call the number in your signature. In other words, very smart people clarify who's calling whom. Yet we can do better still. Remember, we're minding the minutia. Here's what super smart people do. Great, I look forward to chatting on 1 p.m. on Monday, April 2nd. I'll call the number in your signature. I figure we'll need 20 minutes. In other words, sometimes it helps to make it explicit how much time you're requesting. Of course, the smartest people know there's one last thing to do. Any guesses? One last thing we haven't done yet. Anybody?
I'll send a reminder.
What do you mean by a reminder?
Before the meeting.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly right. So it's called an invitation, a calendar invite. It would look, you're exactly right, something like this. Great, I look forward to chatting, you know the drill. And in the last sentence here, calendar invite for 20 minutes coming shortly. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Excellent, yeah. So they send an invitation.
Mhm.
Okay, listen, I lied. I want to spend another minute or two on calendar invites. That's because there's a right way and a wrong way to create that invite or reminder. And most people, unfortunately, do it the wrong way. Let's talk first about the title of the invite or the subject line. Imagine you're Amy scheduling a call with Dan. Here's how most people label their invites. Call, Dan Egan. Now imagine you're Dan, reading on your calendar, call with Dan Egan. It doesn't exactly tell you much. So what do smart people do? They identify both participants like this. Call, Dan Egan / Amy Bruckheimer. And very smart people go one step further. They also identify the topic of the call like this. Call, Dan Egan / Amy Bruckheimer, frozen yogurt. Again, if you've seen the show Veep, you'll appreciate the spelling there. That's how to create an excellent invite. Now let's talk about the location field of the invite. Again, let's break down the good and bad. Here's what most people do. They put the call-in number in the location field, then stick the password in the notes field. That's half helpful, or unhelpful if I'm honest. Smart people, as you can imagine, do it a little differently. Smart people put the number and password in the location field. That way, they make the process of looking up the call-in credentials easy and quick. Yet very smart people do one more thing. Can you spot the difference? Anyone? Very smart people put hyphens between the digits in the password, just as you do with a phone number. As anyone who's ever had to peer at their smartphone for the dial-in credentials knows, this small visual gesture makes a big difference. The same is true of video calls, whether you use Zoom, WebEx, Skype, or anything else. Don't just write Zoom in the location field, thus forcing people to open the details section of the invite. Instead, write Zoom together with the link. Your colleagues will thank you. Finally, if all this sounds like a pain, well, you're absolutely right. That's why there are programs that automate the process. Here are two of the most popular ones, Calendly and Schedule Once. These tools, one of which is free, take the hassle out of going back and forth to find a mutually agreeable time. The third thing I'd like to discuss is preparation. If you want to ace a call, then there's one simple thing you need to habituate yourself to: preparation. Let's talk first about the written kind of prep. Specifically, let's talk about note-taking. Here's a quote from investor Chris Sacca. "Every successful person I know takes notes. You want to be noticed and rise through the ranks at your company? In every meeting, take notes," end quote. Of course, to take notes, you need something to take notes on. So to every call, bring a pen and paper. This equipment signals that you're treating the meeting with seriousness. By contrast, if you show up unarmed, you're basically signaling the opposite, that the appointment is undeserving of your full attention. That said, don't just bring a blank, empty notebook. Come prepared by jotting down 2 or 3 talking points in advance. For each talking point, you need only list a word or two, a headline. Underneath, you can further list keywords that serve as memory triggers for your supporting details, such as stories or statistics. This shorthand gives you the freedom to speak naturally while helping to bring the relevant material to mind quickly and efficiently. Now, let's talk about your duties as the host of a call. As a host, it behooves you to turn your notes into an agenda. Let me put the point this way. If you want your calls to be free-floating odysseys of digression, then don't write an agenda. For everyone else, an agenda is critical. It makes sure that everyone's expectations are aligned. It helps to keep the conversation focused, and it communicates purpose to attendees. If you want people to treat you seriously, then you need to treat them seriously. Agendas are critical, so I want to spend a few slides on them. First, let me stress this. The top of the document, the top of the document should include one simple sentence, no more, which clearly explains the reason for the call. In this case, that sentence is, how do we make implementation of the Clean Jobs Commission the Vice President's main legacy? If you can't explain the reason for your call in a single sentence, then you haven't thought enough about why you need the call in the first place. Let me repeat that. If you can't explain the reason for your call in a single sentence, then your call is, pardon the pun, uncalled for. Here's something else that your agenda might include. A list of expected attendees. Include both their name and their job title. To be sure, a list isn't necessary when everyone already knows each other, but when the participants don't all work together on the regular, then identification is invaluable. Here's another pesky thing about agendas. We've all been invited to calls where the agenda gets distributed 30 seconds beforehand. Helpful? This is not. The best hosts send out an agenda at least an hour in advance. After all, if you want your participants to prepare, you need to give them time to do so. I want to make one final point about agendas. We've all been on calls or in meetings where the host asks, so, who wants to take notes? Yeah, don't everyone speak at once. Instead, as the host, try assigning a note taker before the call. Again, as with agendas, notes aren't necessary for every call, but for big important ones, they're critical. The other kind of preparation is physical. There are lots of ways to prepare yourself physically. Let me start with another personal story. When I came to Washington, I interned at a think tank. What I didn't know going in was the dress code. It wasn't business casual, it was business. In other words, I was required to wear a necktie. Now, like most 21-year-olds, I resented this excruciating encroachment on my individuality. I'd ask, how does choking my neck and draping an accessory down my torso improve the quality of my writing? Yeah. In retrospect, the answer is clear. Being dressed for business put me in a business state of mind. And that framework told me that I was there to do important work, not goof around. Today, I work from home. And as anyone who's worked from home can tell you, one of the great perks is that you can wear whatever you want. Here's the thing, though. It's tough to project gravitas while sporting flip-flops and shorts. So when I have an important call, I put in a shirt that's been dry cleaned and pants that have been ironed. It's a trick that my body plays on my mind. If I'm dressed for success, then I'll speak with success. Here's another story. What you do immediately before the call matters more than you may think. This may sound obvious, but don't go into an hour-long call hungry. Does anyone remember Chloe Kim? That's her on the screen. Yes, Jeffrey. Yeah, you may remember this. During the 2018 Winter Olympics, the snowboarder hadn't finished her breakfast. And now, halfway through the half-pipe competition, she was regretting it. So Chloe did what any 17-year-old might do. She tweeted. Jeffrey, do you remember what she said?
No, Jonathan, I don't remember what she said, but I remember it was unique experience in the sporting world. I do remember her. I forget what she tweeted. I forget exactly what she tweeted.
Here it is. Jeff, do you want to read that for us?
When I finished my breakfast sandwich, but my stubborn self decided not to, and now I'm getting hangry.
That's right, yeah.
Hungry? It's angry.
No, hangry.
Angry.
That's a portmanteau of headache and hungry.
Yeah.
So don't put yourself in this situation. Your stomach is connected to your brain. By feeding one, you feed them both. Similarly, if I'm in a bad mood before a call, my snippiness will inevitably seep through. It's extraordinarily difficult to reverse your disposition on a dime. So what can you do? Especially for important calls, I like to set aside 10 minutes beforehand where I can physically relax. Sometimes this means stretching to loosen tension. Sometimes this means going for a short walk around the block to calm my nerves. Sometimes this means calling my wife and making small chat to exercise my vocal cords. In addition to relaxing, here's something the best speakers all do. They practice. Specifically, they road test their talking points. Let me put the point this way. If the first time you're articulating your message is the call itself, then you're shortchanging yourself. You're choosing to weaken your effectiveness. If you like sports, think about this analogy. Runners don't just start running, they stretch, they jog, they warm up. So should you. Here's a fun fact. Does anyone know how Barack Obama warms himself up? By pumping himself up. Specifically, he listens to the rap music of Eminem. In fact, there's a behind-the-scenes video on YouTube from the 2016 Democratic Convention, which shows the then president bobbing his head to Eminem's song, Lose Yourself. Do what you need to do to get into the right headspace. Finally, if you work in an open office or a cubicle, or even at a cramped home with kids and a pet and a spouse, you're no doubt used to noise. Unfortunately, the person or people on the other end of your call may not be. Speaking for myself, even as a former reporter who worked in a newsroom, I hate noise. Come to think of it, maybe that's why I'm a former reporter. My advice, go somewhere where you can shut the door. Quiet facilitates concentration. All right, part 2. Making good progress. We only have about 3 hours left, guys. Just kidding. The fourth thing I'd like to discuss is what I call read and react. This is my favorite tip. If you're a football fan, think of it as calling an audible. Most people would advise you to resist the temptation to get right down to business. Instead, they tell you to create a conversational environment, nurture the relationship, spend the first minute or two establishing rapport as you would around the office water cooler. That's absolutely correct. This is wise counsel. Remember, one of the most important questions people ask about others is this: can I work with this guy? As the cliche goes, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Of course, you knew this was coming. There's a but here. Before he became president, Dwight Eisenhower was a 5-star general in the Army. His experience commanding troops in World War II informed the following quote: "The plan is useless, but planning is essential." What Eisenhower meant is, don't get sucked into the trap of clinging to your plan if, when you arrive on the scene, the situation has changed. In other words, read the room, then react accordingly. Here's another personal story. I recently spoke with a prospective client about budget. I was prepared to follow my own advice, shoot the breeze, establish rapport, but while my prospect was polite, I sensed that he just wanted to get down to brass tacks. So I called an audible. I cut the small chat, curtailed my speech explaining the value of my work, and named my price. Happily, he agreed on the spot. Read and react. The fifth thing I'd like to discuss is conference calls. I know a lot of you are here to learn about conference calls, so let's dive in. If you're like me, when you hear a voice you don't recognize, you try to pick up clues. For example, the speaker mentioned sales. Does that mean she is Jessica from business development? You might even type keywords into Google in hopes of unearthing an answer. It doesn't have to be this way. There's an easy solution. When speaking on a conference call, especially one where everyone doesn't know you, always identify yourself. Hi, this is Jonathan. It's as simple as that, and everyone will be grateful for the immediate clarity. I got to tell you guys a stubborn fact. You can't multitask. But here's the good news. No one can. What I mean by that is that you can't do two things at once, as well as you can do one thing one at a time. I, too, once made excuses. I'm just scrolling through Instagram. I'm just updating my to-do list. I was wrong. As science shows, despite the brain's remarkable complexity and power, a bottleneck emerges when it tries to perform two distinct tasks at once. What's more, one of the most offensive things you can do is to show someone they don't have your full attention. If you've seen the movie The Social Network, you may remember that scene where a lawyer in a deposition asks Mark Zuckerberg, "Mr. Zuckerberg, do I have your full attention?" You wouldn't multitask in a meeting, so don't do it on the phone. Give your fellow attendees the same respect you'd give them if you were face to face. All phones today come with a magical button. On the phone you see here, the button is in the bottom right. Can you guess what it is? Anyone? I'll blow it up. It's the mute button. My advice, master this magical button. Specifically, I'd recommend that by default, you keep yourself on mute. In fact, if you're in a noisy place, you should only unmute yourself when you want to speak. Of course, there are a couple caveats. The first caveat, make sure you're prepared to unmute quickly when you're asked a question. I'm sure you've encountered the scenario wherein someone is talking, but no one can hear her. That wastes everyone's time. The second caveat, some buttons are tricky, so make absolutely 100% sure you know when you're muted and when you're not. Here's a memorable example. I suspect some of you may know this. Earlier this year, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Supreme Court conducted a case over the phone. This was the first time the High Court had ever heard arguments this way. And at about 59 minutes into the scheduled hour, there was a distinct sound of a toilet flush. Apparently someone, we don't know who, had forgotten to mute. It was the flush heard around the judiciary. Let's talk about jokes for a quick minute. Listen, I am sarcastic to a fault. I have a very dry wit. The thing is, in general, it's best to avoid jokes in virtual meetings. While your interlocutor can hear your inflection, she can't see you grin or wink. Phone-based humor is a misinterpreted minefield. So err on the side of formality. Save the sarcasm for when you're chatting one-on-one or when you're meeting in person. One last thing to avoid on conference calls. Resist the temptation to speak simply to show you're present. You don't have to articulate every thought that occurs to you. In fact, you'll be more effective if you speak only when you have something important to say. No doubt some of you are thinking, but by the time I'm ready to speak, the opportunity has passed. That happens. Let it go. Plus, you can always follow up later by email. The sixth thing I'd like to discuss is movement. And I suppose we'll wrap up after this section, movement. It's a long one, though. This is the most important thing I can leave you with today, hence the color of the slide. If you remember nothing else that I say, remember the importance of movement. Here are 5 ways to project confidence and vigor in a virtual environment. Number 1, smile. As I was putting together this presentation, I emailed my colleagues and asked them for tips. Almost everyone said something that seemed painfully cliched. Smile. Yet the more I thought about this advice, the more I recognized its importance. If you occasionally smile when talking, the audience will be able to recognize the warmth in your voice. In fact, several years ago, researchers in the United Kingdom discovered that people can quote unquote hear a smile. You heard that right. A visual cue is also an auditory one. So, as appropriate, go ahead and grin. It'll make your voice sound friendlier and more likable. Number 2, look, let's face it, phone calls can be boring. They can drain your energy faster than you can say, "What's the dial-in?" So rather than sit in a chair, try standing up. Recent research suggests that standing can sharpen attention and help you process information better. Think about it. When you're sitting, you tend to lean back. You may even slouch. Your focus can fade. But when you're standing, you're physically projecting yourself. You're more alert and thus more confident. And if you're able to, try walking around. Moving helps expel nervous energy and gets your blood flowing. In fact, rarely do I take a call where I'm sitting for the entire conversation. I like to pace around my condo or walk in a circle on my balcony. Number 3, gesticulate. If you're like me, you talk with your hands. It's part and parcel of how I communicate. Yet when you're on a call, some people think it's odd to gesticulate. It's not. To the contrary, moving your hands makes your voice sound more natural. In fact, try forgetting that you're even on a call. Instead, speak as you would in person, with gestures and smiles and energy. I bet you'll be happier, not only with your vigor, but also with your confidence. Number 4, wear a headset. Anyone who spends her day on the phone knows this secret. A good headset or headphones is priceless. Don't you love it when your elbow starts cramping from holding the phone up to your ear? How about when your neck aches from curving it toward your phone? No, that's not fun. Then invest in a solid piece of hardware. Maybe you can even expense it to your company. I myself rarely take a call without wearing my Bose headphones. This purchase has made my life immeasurably easier. Number 5. Anyone know who these two guys are? Any guesses? Hint, they're 2 of the world's top podcasters. Anyone know? That's Ryan Serhant, class of 2006 on the left, and Jocko Willink, on the right. One reason why Ryan and Jocko are so successful is because they speak with energy. They know how to infuse their voice with eagerness and enthusiasm. Most of us never think about this. We focus on our diction rather than our delivery. Professionals, whether podcasters, radio hosts, or even voiceover actors, know better. They know that when you're in a virtual environment, your voice matters far more than it does in person. Accordingly, they take care to vary their vocal cords in order to emphasize something, to add emotion, or even just to change up their pace, and thus keep listeners engaged. Happily, this is a skill you can learn. How? It's easier than you think. Just practice. Remember, every time you raise an idea, you're effectively telling a story. And the best storytellers don't speak in a monotone. They're impassioned and expressive. Let me put the point this way. The more you can train your voice to exude energy, the more contagious you'll make your ideas. So, Ellen, I know we are definitely over time. I have a lot more to go, but I'm going to stop there, and I guess we can take questions, if that works for you.
I think that works great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I and my colleagues and I spend a lot of time on telephone calls and Zoom calls, and a lot of what you said hit home. And even though I spend a lot of time on calls, I learned things. I hope everybody else did too. I'd like to open it up for questions, and actually feel free to unmute yourselves if you have questions. I have questions, but I'm gonna let other people ask first. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, well, I'll kick it off then. How's that? You talked about agendas, Jonathan, which I am totally in favor of, especially for conference calls. And I wonder how you feel about agendas for one-on-one calls.
I love them. Listen, I have a business coach with whom I meet once a month, and I'm mentoring 2 individuals right now, and I asked the latter to do what I do with the former, which is prepare an agenda for each call. I know myself, I can digress without any trouble whatsoever. And it's easy for at the end of our, 60-minute call or 45-minute call to say, oh, I totally meant to forget, the most important thing I want to discuss. My wife does this all the time, when we're ready to go to bed, she says, oh yeah, just one more thing. And that's like the most important thing she meant to mention. So I find that agendas, not only make sure that you capture everything that you want to discuss, but they also tend to keep the conversation focused. We don't have, if you only have a 20-minute call, if it's only 15, or even if it's an hour, the most important thing is that you forge a connection and chat conversationally, and that can quickly, you can quickly chat about, when Hamilton might be reopening or what's happening in the neighborhood, and then the entire time has elapsed before you get a chance to discuss the real issues. I'm sure we've all been on calls where at the end they say, oh, we didn't get to discuss what we wanted to. Let's schedule another call. That drives me nuts. How do you fix that? The easiest thing, just write an agenda. And quite frankly, if you're going to write it, I would send it over to the other person. Don't just keep it to yourself. It lets the other person know that there are 6 things you have to discuss, and it keeps everybody focused.
Super. There is a question in the chat from Julie DeRoma, class of 10, who says, what advice do you have for how to deal with people or clients who are people who interrupt you or cut you off on a telephone call?
Am I allowed to curse on these calls? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, listen, this is one of the slides that we don't have time for, and I apologize. This is, like a 2-hour presentation that I tried to truncate. I should have cut more because I know I ran long. Listen, this is really not your fault as a participant. This is the host's responsibility to ensure that civility and politeness are the norm. In fact, I believe that managers should set firm policies for conference calls, virtual meetings, Zoom conversations that not only, as I mentioned earlier, is multitasking inappropriate, but also that people should not interrupt one another. There should be a default to deference. And listen, we're never going to get past the point where 2 people speak at once. That's an occupational hazard of a virtual environment. I'm sure you may have seen Tripp and Tyler's viral video on YouTube, a conference call in real life. I mean, we're never going to get past this, but there is a way to mitigate the problem, and that's to be deferential. Oh, no, you go ahead and speak. That's just a trick that a lot of people have used successfully. Another one is to defer to the more senior person. Listen, if you and your boss start to speak at the same time, I think it's a good idea to let your boss go first. If you and your dog both reach for, I don't know, the coffee, or you and your cat both reach for the milk that you're pouring into your coffee, I think you have right of way there that you can, snatch the milk away. But in general, I would let seniority prevail. And I would ask if it's becoming a problem. I would seek to talk to your manager and say, I noticed this has become a problem. I wonder if you could set some ground rules, because it's not your responsibility as a participant to sort of drive the conversation and certainly not monopolize it or even cut people off. If they do cut you off, just back down and, let the other person sort of dominate. But it's your manager's, this is the jurisdiction of the host or manager. I hope that answers your question.
John, Margaret Schilling asks, do you think every phone call should be scheduled, or can some be spontaneous with clients?
Yeah, certainly spontaneous. We spend so much time talking, I'm scheduling a call. I have a call with a potential client on Friday. And, I like to do my calls in the morning. Turns out she's in California, and she didn't mention that until like 2 emails in. So we spent a lot of time. We probably spent as much time scheduling the call as we will actually talking, because she was referred to me by a colleague. So I don't think it's going to be a particularly long conversation. I'm in favor of spontaneous calls. In fact, one of my newest clients, the guy called me on a Friday afternoon about, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. And listen, I was around. I'm happy to chat. It was much more efficient than, sending me an email and me having to do my research about him and set up a call and take time. So, yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with spontaneous calls. I think that you shouldn't necessarily expect the other person to be available for as long as you may need them. One caveat that I would strongly stress, and this we don't have time to cover this, but many people, when they call someone else, just start talking. Hey, Jeff, it's great. I have a question for you. I like to begin, especially if it's a business relationship, with the following intro. Do you have time for do you have a few minutes? Do you have time for a question? Don't ask that I catch you at a bad time. There has never in the history of phone calls ever been a good time. I'm like George. If you guys like Seinfeld, one of my favorite, quotes is from George Costanza when he says, "I've never been to a meeting where I wanted the other guy to show up." So don't ask, is now a bad time, now a good time? Just, do you have a few minutes? I have a quick question for you. So stuff like that softens the blow of urgency and spontaneity. But I'm fully in favor of ad hoc calls.
Thank you.
Hi, I asked the next question on the chat. My name is Sarah. I work at a small company where I share phone answering duties, and I was asking about how to respond to sort of unexpected questions or questions where you might not immediately know the right answer, because my default is sort of my mind will just go blank and I'll start stammering, and I have trouble handling that sort of quick back and forth on a phone call.
Interesting question. I actually just wrote about this on LinkedIn. There are two types of people in the world when asked the question. There are those who BS. Maybe they try to find the answer in the course of speaking, and there are those who admit humility. And I prefer the latter, and I would add a caveat. If you don't know something, the last thing you want to say is, "I don't know." The best thing you can say is, "I don't know, but I'll find out." And make a specific promise. So if somebody asks you, when was Albert Einstein born? Sir, I'm so sorry, I don't have that information at my fingertips, but I'll tell you what, I promise you that I will look it up and get back to you by the close of business, which is 5 p.m. Eastern here. I'll just, my mother is going through a health issue right now, and one of her doctors has been fantastic. They're so busy that they rarely pick up when you call them, but the voice message from his nurse says, "Hi, you've reached, Dr. Leitner. This is Katie. Please leave your name and number, and someone will get back to you by the end of the day." And mark my words, they get back to you, even if it's 7 p.m. They don't let calls go unreturned. And there's nothing wrong whatsoever with admitting ignorance and embracing, being a little humble. The key part is just promising that you'll rectify their problem. And I'll tell you what, this is one of my biggest pet peeves in life, I would say. Let's say that you've promised this person that you'll get back to them by the close of business, but you don't have an answer. Most people say, "Well, I have nothing to say, so I'm not going to waste a call. Why bother?" I think that's myopic. My advice is, even if you don't have something to say, you made a promise to get back to this person, so call him or her up and say, "Listen, I know I promised you a call. I don't have any new information. I'm still waiting on, Susan. As soon as she gets back to me, and I will follow up on Monday, I will let you know." So good question. Thank you for that.
It looks like, let's see, Griffin Kearns is the next, who just graduated from Hamilton. Griffin, do you want to unmute yourself and read your question?
Hi, everybody. I have a question about specifically a situation that I've experienced several times, especially recently on networking calls. And I'm wondering what the best thing to do is in situations where you can't hear another person just because there's background noise on their end or there's a bad connection. or even if they're maybe speaking too fast or too quietly or not clearly. And I know that I just hate having to constantly say to that person, oh, could you say that again, or could you go a little slower? So what would you say is the best way to deal with a situation like that?
Well, Griffin, first, congratulations on graduating,
Thank you.
especially in these, troubling times. I know, Ellen, please correct me, isn't Hamilton going to do the walk next year?
That's correct. We had a virtual ceremony on the original scheduled day in May, and it's looking like next year will be the in-person ceremony.
Nice. Well, so this is an excellent question, and it's one that I encounter myself, and I'm not sure I have a great answer. Hey, I practice what you preach, right? To the previous question when you don't know the answer. But here, I'll give you a couple thoughts. So this happens much more frequently than we realize. Somebody is walking around, somebody's in the middle of nowhere with bad reception. They're on Wi-Fi calling rather than LTE. They're using their computer rather than a phone. So I think to be perfectly candid, that you have to get comfortable with lack of perfection, with poor quality calls. Doesn't mean that you have to embrace them, and it doesn't mean that you can't speak up. But I think because everybody was thrown in this new reality rapidly and without any training, we just were sort of told all of a sudden, that the life as we knew it was on hold, and we now had to figure out the screen share feature of Zoom forthwith. That we need to get used to this. Maybe not. If this is still happening, let's say in September, I think in September we can say no. Get your stuff. I'm looking for a euphemism for an epithet, but get your situation together. At a certain point, the excuses fade. But the first one is. It happens to us all. The second thing is I would feel perfectly comfortable in saying, listen, I just can't hear you. And I have done this. I do this regularly, in fact. And I'll tell you the truth. I was in New Jersey for the past few weeks. The reception was terrible. I'm resisting a New Jersey joke here. It's okay. I grew up there. But the reception was terrible. And so I actually realized it was my fault. My headphones were not connecting to my phone correctly. And so that's the second thing that you want to do. You want to make absolutely sure that the problem is not on your end. And I realized that by actually calling a few friends and saying, hey, just let's spend 5 minutes with me. Let's troubleshoot this. The third thing I would say is it's very frustrating when this happens. And even if you're the best candidate, asking somebody to call you again and redial you and call you back, that can be exasperating. But at the same time, if you can't hear, then it's just a complete waste of time. So what do? I think whatever your solution is, and both are perfectly fine to say, listen, we need to reschedule, or can I call you back and let's keep muddling, or let's keep muddling through. Whatever scenario you choose, whatever solution you choose, I think you need to be apologetic. I am so sorry this is happening. Please know that this is 100% my fault. I am doing everything possible. I spent the morning on the phone with Apple and then the afternoon with Verizon. We can't figure out the problem, but I'm actively working on it. I think that because this is happening so often, if you couch the problem in the right way with the appropriate, acknowledgments and apologies, that you'll be okay. And that's what really matters. As I said, this happens to me regularly. I was on a big call with a client. I couldn't this was a presentation I delivered 2 months ago to Hong Kong. The connection was awful. Griffin, I couldn't hear any of the questions. And it was just, I had to actually ask them. I think at one point I said, I asked the host, could you summarize the question in the chat window? So I hope that helps. I'm not sure I gave you the best answer, but I hope some of that was useful.
It's certainly very helpful. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Jonathan, Rob Spatz, class of 90, has a question. Rob, would you like to unmute and ask him directly? I'll go ahead and read it to you, Jonathan. So it's how do you set accountability for a call? Besides an agenda, I always prepare a minimum requirements for next steps and outcomes. I also set my requirements or process versus the other, that of the counterparty. What you do so calls are additive.
Good question. I mean, the key thing is that I would say two things. As we discussed, if you can't specify in a single simple sentence your agenda, then there's no reason for the call. You haven't thought carefully or thoughtfully enough. Thoughtfully enough. Wow, what a brilliant statement. You haven't thought carefully enough about the reason for the call in the first place. So that's the first thing to make the call additive. The second thing is, as I've mentioned, and I'll continue to do so because it's perhaps the biggest knock about calls and meetings, the worst thing you can do is at the end of one of these to conclude, oh, we need to have another. And so one thing that you could include that sometimes is very helpful, especially in big meetings in the agenda, is to include next steps. So as a result of this meeting, we will, move forward with Hamilton's decision to renovate KJ or devote the funds to the pool. And in addition, and then finally, I think we didn't have time to discuss this. This is at the end. At the end of a call, if you're the host, again, the buck stops with the host. So this is really the host's responsibility. At the end of the call, the host has to do, I think, either I outlined 4 very specific things. One, you obviously thank everybody. 2, you tell them when to expect the notes. But the most important thing is that I explicitly articulate next steps. And you actually want to, if possible, look the person in the eye and say, Griffin, so you've agreed to, send over that TPS report. We'll expect that by, Wednesday at 5 p.m. And then as the host, you actually follow up with each person whom you've tasked with something. And I have an example, but you just say, thanks so much, Leon, for agreeing to draft Selena's announcement speech. Look forward to receiving, a first draft by Thursday at 3. Please make sure to copy, Mike. So next steps, explicitly identifying next steps is absolutely critical to holding people accountable. And then as the host, equally important, you have to send them an email, just basically double confirming what they've agreed to.
Jonathan, thank you. And that is a perfect lead into, unfortunately, my having to say, I'm afraid that our time here is, that we're over our time here. I so appreciate you helping us all think about telephone calls. As I said, I spend a lot of time on the phone, and this is very helpful to me, I think, and I hope also helpful to everybody else. Follow up, what comes next? This meeting was recorded. It will be posted on our website probably in a week or so. They edit some of the chit chat in the beginning. So watch for that. You can watch it all over again. You can tell your friends and relations to watch it. And all alumni should have gotten an email from Hamilton today with a continuing robust schedule of virtual events. Tomorrow afternoon, there's a cooking class. On Wednesday, there is a session about systemic racism in America. So delicious and timely topics. I hope to see more of you on calls like this in the future. And obviously you've got Jonathan's telephone number up here. So I'm hopeful, Jonathan, that this is legit to say that if people have questions that they weren't able to get to, they can call you.
By all means, yeah, absolutely. Call, text, email. I accept all forms of communications.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your expertise, and everybody for your time. Be well, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was great, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. Really do. It was great.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Yeah, it really was great. And Robin, hang in there, buddy. Robin, my man, hang in there. Don't give up, man. I had breakfast with Robin at the last reunion last summer. We had a great time just chatting and catching up with him. And I mentioned my brother was the vice president of Apple, but that was like 30 years ago, man. We're old men. We're retired, financially comfortable people now. And Robin goes, can your brother help me get a job at Apple Computer? And I go, I don't think anybody who's at Apple now that was there 30 years ago. I honestly don't. I did mention it to him. I said, Pete, can you help a friend of mine get a job at Apple? And my brother said, Jeff, what are you talking about Apple? I've moved on to 10 different companies since Apple. What are you talking about that? You know, that's my kid brother, the financial Silicon Valley genius. And but anyways, thanks all. Stay healthy. Thank you all so much for everything. I really appreciate it. Robin, hang in there, buddy.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
Really appreciate you all. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Jonathan, okay if I send the link out to everybody who was on the call? The link for the
Of course, yeah, please do.
Okay, absolutely, I will. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Sorry this went so long. I forgot, to cut as much as I meant to, but I appreciate, the opportunity, Ellen and John, and I hope that you have a wonderful summer.
It was great to see you, to hear you. I really appreciate your time. Hope all goes well with your mom, and I hope we can see each other in person sometime soon.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Okay, take care.
Take care.